Right, well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming along to this panel discussion on should councils spend taxpayers' money on commercial property and investments. I think this is about my third one of these I've done now, and I think this is probably going to be one of our really good ones. We've got a fantastic panel, I have to say. Start of the panel, I'd go as far as to say. I'm just going to do a little bit of introduce everyone, but also do a little bit of disclosure at the same time. We have the Member of Parliament for Mansfield, Ben Bradley, and this is why I'm just going to do a bit of disclosure that we have, TPA has done a campaign with Ben up in Mansfield against the local council. They're investing in commercial property, so I'm just going to put that up front now. But for the purposes of this debate, I'm going to try and be as neutral as one can be. Situated directly to my left, we have Alex Wild, who regular TPA supporters may recognise as our former research director, but he is now director at PublicFirst, which is a politics and communications consultant. So, something like that, yeah. Okie doke. Directly to my right, we have Councillor Ferris Cowper, who is currently a cabinet member of East Hampshire District Council and is, I think, one of the major proponents of councils investing in commercial property. I think you've been in Daily Mail and all sorts of things.
Oh, Sunday Times,
yeah. And you gave a very robust defence of your position at our panel discussion at Conservative Party conference back in September, October time. And then we have Gerald Vernon-Jackson, Councillor Gerald Vernon-Jackson, who is currently leader of Portsmouth Council, who also, I believe, you've recently been undertaking some investments, and like Ferris, are here to make a passionate defence of that. Right, so each panellist is going to speak for approximately 8 minutes, and then we'll basically open it straight up to the floor with questions. I have a couple of questions that have been submitted via the internet for people who can't make it this evening, so I'll handle those first after the panellists have finished speaking. If I can ask that if questions can be brief and to the point and not, dare I say it, slightly rambling essays, just so we can get as many questions as possible, because we find this every panel discussion, we always struggle to get in the questions and then people go home slightly upset, so we don't want that. Anyway, let's crack on. I'm going to start with Alex, please.
Cheers, Harry. Thanks for coming, everyone. This has been from my time at TPA as well, it's been a bit of a interesting issue in which I found myself quite conflicted. There's obviously a wish to keep council tax low, and there is an undeniable squeeze on funding, whatever we think of overall whether the government's reduced spending enough since 2010 or not. It's undeniable that local authorities have seen substantial reductions in grants, and obviously those are planned to be phased out altogether when we move to 100% business rates retention. And obviously investment income can supplement this, keep tax low, and I think even Ferris has said that he thinks he can get rid of council tax altogether. So, obviously that's something the TPA would love. But it's not, it doesn't come without risks. And there are a number of problems that I think I've identified that I have with it. There are 5, I think, principal ones. The first is that, like anything, like any sector of the economy, any business, anything in the public sector, schools, hospitals, anything, there's massive variation in the quality of councils. And we may have some councils where we have lots of people who are extremely commercially minded, loads of private sector experience and all of that, who are actually very good and do know a lot about commercial property markets, but there are lots who don't. So it may be that one council a few councils may be very good at this, but there may be some who are frankly clueless and are just not getting into things that they don't really understand, and potentially putting taxpayers on the hook for a lot of money. And I think this is sort of a similar point, but I put it down as a separate one. There does seem to be a lot of eggs going into property a lot of eggs going into one basket in terms of commercial property. So I have concerns about risk profiles of some of these balance sheets. And I know that some councils have tended to go more for things like office space, whereas some sort of retail analysts have been very surprised at the amounts of money that some councils are paying for things like out-of-town shopping centres and supermarkets, which a lot of analysts think have a pretty limited future ahead of them, what with online retail and things like that. The third point I'd make is that most of this borrowing is done through the Public Works Loan Board. I mean, councils can borrow from banks, and indeed in the sort of early 2000s, a lot of councils did have a lot of commercial borrowing when it was more expensive to effectively borrow on the gilt market via the Public Works Loan Board, and some of those things have gone pretty badly wrong. These LOBOs, lender option, buyer option loans, which have left some councils paying huge amounts of interest. But originally, when the Public Works Loan Board was set up, it was for things like sanitation. It wasn't really designed for property investment. I also think that there is always a strong element of moral hazard whenever politicians are spending any taxpayers' money. But I think with this kind of investment, it's even greater, because it's sort of local politicians borrowing at central government sort of sovereign rates, and what happens if and when there's a default. It's not going to be, by and large, local taxpayers picking up the bill for this. It's going to be national taxpayers if and when it does go wrong. And the fifth point I'd make is that I do think this is quite a significant distortion and potentially quite anti-competitive behaviour, in that councils can borrow at sovereign rates and other property investors have to borrow at commercial rates. But I think that overall, what it does show is that there is a funding squeeze, and I do think the way in which we do local government, local authority finance is not really fit for purpose. I mean, you only really have sort of some leeway on business rates, but mostly rely on council tax, which is a very blunt instrument, and for various reasons, which were probably sensible at the time in the 1980s, the government decided that it wasn't going to let councils run amok and borrow all sorts of money, issue their own debt instruments, which was understandable at the time. But I do think it's limited, and I do think it's run its course, and that I think in the future the answer to local government finance is going to be more towards devolution of tax powers, whether it's local sales taxes, local income taxes, different types of property taxes, rather than having sort of just council tax as a very blunt instrument, and then sort of varying levels of investment income to supplement it. I would also say that I think that there is a pretty dangerous incentive for central government here, because they want to see council tax low. They want to see the deficit reduced. So I think they're actually quite happy to see some of this potentially risky behaviour going on, in that if it all goes wrong, they can blame the council and it won't show up in their in central government finances quite as much. So I mean, those are my principal issues with it. But I'm open to persuasion.
Thank you, Alex. Gerald, let me turn to you now, please.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's very nice to be here. Although I do feel slightly like Daniel in the Lion's Den. Not only am I a council leader at the Taxpayers Alliance, but I'm a Lib Dem council leader to make it even worse. I've been leader of the council in Portsmouth. I'm on my second term now for 11 years. And in my view, I think my job as the leader of the council is to try to make sure that we provide the services that people need and want at the lowest possible cost to local residents. And that's what we try to do. And that means we have to look at how things are funded. So just a little bit about Portsmouth. We're a small city on the south coast, 215,000 people, most densely populated urban area outside central London, with flat, coastal, and most of it's an island. We're the home of the Royal Navy, but we've also got BAE, Babcock, the NHS, University, Wiggle, and the football club as major employers. We're predominantly a white working class city. Educational standards around the average, but health inequality is very great. So if you live in the city centre, on average you die 10 years earlier than if you live 3 miles away in the suburbs. And my view is that the council exists to provide the services that residents need and want. And just to go through a few of them, we provide children's social services. At the moment we have, I think this week, 430 kids in care. And these are children who have to be cared for away from home for their safety. And that's 100 more than we had a few years ago, and it's extremely expensive. A place in a children's home is around £2,000 per child per week. And I've had to sign one off last month for a particularly difficult child, £8,000 for that child per week. And you'll never see that. We also do adult social care, and our job there is to support people in their own homes through social services and to get people out of hospital to free up beds so that they can be used for people who are more in need. And in both in my council and most councils, both those budgets are overspent this year and have been for the last few years. We also do transport, education, housing, culture and leisure, so playing fields, Victoria's Festival, Great South Run, museums, the D-Day 75 backroom services, which we currently in Portsmouth sell to both the Isle of Wight and Gosport, and planning and regeneration, where we try to get things built. But all of that costs money, and there are 5 ways in which I think I need to look at to balance the books. The first is, as Alex said, is government money. But I think it's unrealistic to expect there to be more government money in the future. And in fact, for our council, the cut lot this year is £5.3 million of government support. We can cut services, but because we have social services, as upper tier authorities do, 50% of our spend is social services, and that really you can't cut. The demand just keeps growing, and that means all the cuts get pushed down onto the stuff that people like. So cutting the grass, the libraries, the theatres, the parks, the rubbish collection, youth service. In Hampshire we don't have a youth service anymore, it's gone. So the third option is to raise taxes, the fourth is to be more efficient, and you can always be more efficient. But sometimes, like with cost of children's home, there is just no way around it. That's just what you get charged. Or the fifth option is to increase the amount of income you've got coming in. Now, for some councils, like Westminster here, it's really easy. They just whack 10pence on the parking meters and they get masses of money in. But for most councils, it's much, much more difficult. So in the budget that we've just done in our council this year, we had to find £4 million of savings. We did 93% of that by efficiencies and extra income. Only 7% came from cuts to services. Yet we set the lowest council tax of any unitary authority in South East England, and that's at band D. But actually in Portsmouth, because we're a really poor city, our average is band B. So people got a significantly lower rate of tax. So I think we've got a duty to taxpayers to keep taxes as low as possible to protect services. So income is hugely important in Portsmouth, and we work on the whole on a cross-party basis on this. And it's a long-term thing. So when the government was building the M27 along the south coast, they weren't going to build a spur into Portsmouth. So the council paid for that, and we still own that motorway and we still maintain it. We built the ferry port in Portsmouth as a department of the council, and it's hugely profitable. We've had long-term investor in commercial property, we own tax office and other things, and we've always been a big landowner. And councils behave really differently to central government. Just to give you one example, all the money that teachers, people in the police, and the health service and the armed forces pay in as their pension contributions go into the government every year. And what do they do with it? They spend it. And how do they pay for the pensions? They take it out of current taxation. With councils, we behave completely differently. So all the pension contributions that come in from people who work for the council, we invest. So in Hampshire, we have £2.5 billion invested to be able to pay for those pensions of people when they finish their work, so it doesn't come out of current taxation. And we just tend to behave in a very different way. So in Portsmouth, over the last 9 years, the government subsidy has come down by 102 million, so we've had to look at ways of getting money in. So we've looked at solar panels on our roofs. We've looked at renegotiating contracts with Brittany Ferry and the port. We've looked at sale and lease back at Whitelink with their terminal. We're investing 15 million quid in our port to bring in extra business. We're investing in properties across the UK, and this was predominantly done by my Conservative colleague who I've had a 4-year gap in opposition. So my Conservative colleagues decided it was a really good thing to do. And so they've invested 130 million. So we bought a Waitrose in Somerset. We bought a Matalan in Swindon. We bought a DHL distribution centre in Birmingham and offices around the country. Now, my issue with it is twofold. The first is they've done it on an interest-only mortgage, so they never pay any of the principal back. And I'm old-fashioned and I like a repayment mortgage because it pays off the principal over time. But also, they've invested all of this outside Portsmouth, and I prefer to invest it here in my city. But what's it done for us? Our port produces an overall operating profit of £7 million a year. A department of it, and we have to be upfront and honest about this, department we call MMD has made a £3 million loss. So we got rid of the management team, we have a new private management team in, and the business plan they produced says we'll get £50 million surplus in over the next 20 years. We've invested, our property investments are bringing us in £4 million profit a year. Solar panels, 1.1 million over the last four years. So we protected services and kept taxes down. One of the differences between myself and my Conservative colleagues is we've also set up an energy company. My Conservative colleagues are really keen on this, as are my Labour colleagues. We think it's really risky. It's a business where 8 energy companies have gone bust over the last year. And some of the practices, if you're going to run an energy company, I think are a bit dodgy if you're a council. But my Labour and Conservative colleagues are absolutely wedded to it and think it's the best thing since sliced bread. But it's not just my council, and I'm sure we're going to hear from Ben about other things. So Eastleigh Borough Council down the road from me have bought the Rose Bowl, the cricket ground, and invested in building the Hilton Hotel there. And they're doing major volume house building. In Eastbourne, they're regenerating their town centre, and they're investing directly in local companies to create jobs. So for me in Portsmouth, what will we do in the future? I think we'll need to invest more in the city and less outside. That means building homes for the homeless, because we can repay it through rent. Private rented sector, great. We're looking at the naval base about investing 50 million quid with the Navy to redo one of the huge jetties there that's almost falling into the sea, so that they have it for their ships, but we have it for major cruise ships coming to Portsmouth to bring lots of people in to spend their money in our city. And we've even got to the point of talking to the Navy of being able to provide the investment that the dead hand of the Treasury refuses to provide. The Treasury won't invest in a dry dock for the aircraft carriers. We might. And so the Naval Base Commander pays that back to us over 40 years so he can have the investment for the defence of our country that the Treasury won't do. But there've got to be safeguards. Things have got to have a decent business plan. It's got to be signed off by the Director of Finance, and it's got to be auditable. But if councils provide the services they need to depend less on central government. They've got to pay more like businesses. They need to protect taxpayers, and that means investing to create income sensibly. Thank you.
Indeed. We're going to introduce Ben. I've got to say, Ben has got to leave us at 20 to 7 to go and do a vote. So I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that. But Ben,
thank you. Yeah, we'll have to run because if I'm not there for voting at 7 o'clock, I will be fully decapitated by the government. So I'll head off and do that. But first, I have to say, I don't have a massive problem in principle with the idea of investing. The government did, after all, say we're going to reduce your VAT and you need to generate that income locally. I think ultimately that's the right principle, but we haven't followed through with that as a government yet. We haven't devolved business rates powers yet. We haven't devolved some of that tax rate. But I agree with Alex. If you want to spend that money, then you be accountable for how you raise it, because ultimately local government and public sector across the board is very good at asking the Treasury for money with no accountability over the tax liability and the level of tax that people pay to fund that. So I do think there is a positive element to making local government responsible for both what they bring in and what they spend. That said, my big problem on a local level, and the campaign that the TPA came up to help me out with, is around our district council actually. So we don't have the social care element and that challenge, but lots of investment, £64 million of investment has been raised again this year in areas outside of the district, which I find incredibly frustrating. it causes them a political problem as well as an economic one, because there's been a bit of an outcry about this. We've had a local leisure centre in my district close, while at the same time the council have borrowed to buy a leisure centre in Manchester, which, as you can imagine, did not go down particularly well with the residents of Warsaw. And the reality is, the amount that this leisure centre in Manchester has cost could have several times over built a shiny new leisure facility to replace what was a falling down old one that wasn't going to be value in the long term. But that could have been replaced, and that the rest of the leisure facilities across the district make a profit. So there's no reason to suggest why they couldn't have invested that money within the district and made a profit for the local taxpayer, as well as continuing to provide that service. So incredibly frustrating. That £64 million invested in our district could actually have made a huge impact and a huge change to what is a deprived community. I represent Mansfield, which is an old coalfield area, an old kind of market town with a market that no longer really exists, with a town centre that's suffering in the same way that many other town centres are, with a raft of social challenges top of the list in terms of things like domestic abuse and poverty, all sorts of economic challenges, very low average income. So similar challenges to many towns in the Midlands and the north of the country. And that £64 million of investment could have been a game changer. We're now in a position where, having put forward this Future High Streets Fund in the November budget, Mansfield District Council, quite rightly, because we want to get that money when it's available, is saying we want to bid for this. We want to get £10 million from government to invest in our high street, when they've just invested £64 million that they've borrowed in other parts of the country, which is quite incredible when you think it through. And with district elections coming up in a few weeks' time, it's something I'll be making a great deal of noise about, I have to be honest. But the bigger challenge, I think, is what you ideally want to achieve is to create an environment in the local area that is right for the private sector to invest in, that's right for business to come and invest. And if you are actively, as a local authority, saying we don't feel that this district is a viable investment for our money, how can you possibly expect the private sector to come in and invest in the district? So that's the real challenge, truthfully. Whatever they say, and I get, as I say, the need for local regeneration. But if you're saying that this is not a good place to invest, and I am not going to invest taxpayers' money in commercial property in this area because there's no decent return on it, how on earth can you then sell that? How can you put across a local plan that says this is an area that's good for business to come and invest in? The reality of that is it is an area that's good for business to come and invest in because it's some of the cheapest land prices anywhere in the country. One of the best places, cheapest places to buy a house. You can buy a house in Mansfield for 50, 60 grand if you look in the right place. So there's a huge opportunity there to attract that investment. The council is saying, well, we want 4 or 5% return on our investment. That's the minimum we would expect. We haven't got that in some of our properties, so we're going to sell some of our existing properties in the town centre because it's impossible to get that level of return. So I sold one of these properties to a private company who now get 12% return on that same property because they have the skills and the knowledge to market it and to utilise that commercial property properly. It comes back to the challenge that's been mentioned. Some local authorities, I have no doubt, do have the skills and the ability to make sensible investments and to be able to raise that money in a credible way and to work within that kind of private sector market. Many don't, and many, particularly an age-old public sector stereotype perhaps, but a lot of people within that environment have never worked anywhere other than the public sector. The Chief Executive of Mansfield District Council started on the front desk of Mansfield District Council and has never worked anywhere else. So to be able to look outwards and to say what is best practice in this market, what's the best way to go about this local investment, something that they have no experience of whatsoever, is always going to be a challenge. And you can see, I hope from what I've laid out, the political difficulties that they've made, but also the fact that it clearly holds the town back in terms of private investment too. So, like I say, we did say we're reducing the grant from government. You need to find some income locally. But I think there are a number of ways to do that. Some of them actually Mansfield District Council do quite well, one of which is house building. So we have a similar issue that most of our housing is Band A. Average is top end of Band A, Band B property, who tend to use more services than they pay for. So one way to go about it, and they are doing the right thing, is to build big houses, frankly. And in an area where land is cheap, where housing is relatively cheap, if you can buy a house for 50 grand, you can imagine what you could buy for 300,000, 400,000, 500,000 in a place like Mansfield. And people are snapping it up because they're moving from other more affluent areas into a place where they can have twice the house for the same money. So benefits for the local area in terms of the money that is around to be spent in the town centre if and when it is ever regenerated. And benefits also to the council in terms of that council tax income. We have a 3-tier authority, and then we complain that we don't use money effectively. We don't have money to spend on things like regeneration. But we could save something in the region of £27 million a year by having a unitary authority to deal with all of these services. We pay 9 chief executives in Nottinghamshire, 9 sets of local directors. We in Mansfield even have an executive mayor who has no additional powers whatsoever, but whose office costs something in the region of £200,000 a year, whereas a council leader is about 25 grand. So the idea that there isn't money there that could be better utilised and services that could be better provided for if local council were organised in a sensible way, and I whatever council you come from, I've never ever met anybody who suggests that if you were to plan local government now, that would look like what it looks like. And the other one I think is partly for government to do, which is that devolution in the future. It's that business rates retention and a proper formula to share that around the country. It's how we do that in planning policy on a local level in terms of creating that environment for business to come and invest and to have the right incentives, the right areas, the right economic and commercial space available for business to come and invest in the town. So there are other options there, I think. As I say, I'll shut up, but I think it has potential to be something that's used well and that can benefit local areas and services if it's used well. But my experience is, in more cases than not, it's used pretty appallingly badly.
Thank you, Ben. And finally, Ferris.
Thanks, Harry. Good evening, everybody. Hope you can hear me all okay. So I represent the district council, and there's another side to districts than one that you've just heard about, and I'm proud to be here to tell you about it. We're all facing the same problem. The public sector really has to refinance itself because government money is reducing, we all know that, and yet the demand on services is going up, so it's quite a conundrum. So for anybody to sit here and say, carry on as you are, is a complete lack of reality. It's not just you can't carry on as you are. Fundamentally, something dramatic has to change. It really does. And this isn't about a bit of finesse here and a finesse there and a tweak on council. It's not. It's at the heart of all public sector funding in this nation, of which local councils are a part. I don't need to tell you the other public sector funding disaster scenarios that we're all facing today. Plenty of them. So we have to think of something big. Now, for 10 years of my life, I was the European director of one of the most admired companies in the world, one of the most successful, Mars Incorporated. One of the most profitable food manufacturer in the world, very innovative. I was there when we took Mars bars and turned them into ice cream. Wow! Local government would say, you can't do that. Ben would say, Mansfield couldn't do that. And I'm telling you, and sitting here now saying, you can do it. Somebody has to engage that. Somebody has to think outside the box. I was there when we took Mars bars and we chopped them up into little bits and we stuck wrappers around them and we called them celebrations. And they said that'll fail. That's because Quality Street and Roses, you'll never get any. We killed them stone dead. In the first 6 months, we outsold them, added together, by a factor of 100%. So don't tell me that local councils can't do this. This is mindset. Local government has to get mindset. Please, somebody do that. So we're doing it in East Hampshire. 200 square miles, a dot on the local government map. Somewhere in the green bit of Hampshire. I'm not even sure if Gerald quite knows where it is, but it's somewhere north of him anyway. Okay?
It's good building that.
So, It is, and in fact, it's so good. We have regeneration programmes in Whitehead and Borden, which dwarf anything they've got in Portsmouth. £1 billion going into Whitehead and Borden, £1 billion in a regenerated new town. And I'm leading that. A district council who are so useless, they dare not buy a Tesco supermarket somewhere. We're leading that, chosen by the county, chosen by the government, chosen by the developers. Local councils can do this. We are not useless. Now, I was going to say a whole load more about us, maybe not, but we have the second best council tax record in Britain of any local authority, over 20 years. I noticed that the TPA's 20-year time frame is slightly different. Ours is 99 to 2019, theirs is 97 to 2017. Theirs has council tax going up by 57% in real times. Ours has come down by just under 30% in real terms. And not one frontline service has been cut. In fact, there's such a raft of improvements, I just don't have the time tonight to tell you about it. Every single dimension of public service is better than it was, despite all of that. So, how are we doing that? Come to that in a minute, because that's the secret, which I'm trying to promote. So, coming year, we've got it frozen again, council tax. We've still got a surplus in our budget, even though we've frozen it. We've introduced a brand new community grant fund for £1 million, a brand new welfare fund. We're going to cut council tax, so things like care leavers, people like care leavers, vulnerable people in the community. We're using our money that we're creating through a range of investments, including property, to make people's lives better. And do you know what? When I came into local government from Mars, I thought that was my job. I thought my job was to make people's lives better. Not to cut adult social care, not to cut children's services, not to shut libraries, not to cut bus services. I thought my job, frankly, was to make it better. So how do you square the circle? Well, you think outside the box. You think celebrations, you think Mars ice cream. And you take that radical thought into that cosy little world of local government where nobody's innovated for donkey's years. You know? So, where are we going with all this? Well, 15 years ago, 80% of our income came from tax and government and 20% from income streams. Now, coming financial year, 2/3 comes from income streams and 1/3 from tax and government. So we completely turned the thing on its head. And some of that is property. Yeah, okay, some of it is. 12%. We're not committing the taxpayer to a property-led income stream. We're not. We're selling services, and not much mention is made of that by too many local authorities. So with our big regeneration programme in Whitehead and Borden, we acquired national exemplar status. So guess what we did? Mr. Mars, thank you for that training programme you sent me on. We created a business called Regenco. If you're a local government, REGENCO, and we sell regeneration advice services all over the United Kingdom, and we are on the MOD approved list of contractors. So it's not just property. Actually, 19% of our income comes from selling services to other councils because we do it better than them. So can we please, in this new world, let's worry about the Mansfields and help them. I'm very happy to help, of course, but let's not use that as the excuse for doing nothing, because some of us are doing it well. And let's take that wellness, that lesson, and migrate it out instead of what local government nearly always does, reduce down to the lowest common denominator. So let's hope for us yet, Harry.
Thank you very much. Let's give our panel a round of applause. Right, okay, well, we've heard a number of interesting things. So we've heard Alex and Ben making the case that it's risky, probably the loan board was not set up for this. There's the market distortion. Ben highlighted the money being invested outside of the area, i.e. not in Mansfield. And then conscious of that, we've got councils under strain. There's potentially tremendous local benefit to be had, and also there's the cutting council tax. I think there was a common theme that seemed to run through that, which was that I think we all pretty much agreed that the current system is not fit for purpose and that something needs to change. Anyway, we'll move on to questions. Before I go to the audience, I've got 2 questions that came in from people who couldn't make it this evening. I think, to be honest, they're both directed to Ferris and Gerald, but if Ben and Alex will tackle them, by all means, please do. So our first one comes from Simon in Staines, and it's a little bit long, but I'll be quick. He says, my local council, Spelthorne, has purchased £650 million worth of commercial property, financed by £650 million of borrowing from central government. If this was replicated by all 400 local authorities, the government would have £260 billion invested in private commercial property and £260 billion more on the national debt. My question is, when did it become government policy to nationalise private commercial property?
See, I think it's even worse.
Okay.
Because I think Spelthorne has a turnover of around 10 or 12 million pounds. And they borrowed 360. Now that gearing is enormous. So our turnover is around 130 million, and we borrowed about that. So our gearing is significantly less. And there have to be some limits of what people can do in terms of levels of risk. And that level of gearing as a council leader would really, really worry me.
So what you're saying is that they've extended themselves too far. And of
Yes.
course, if you then took his calculation here of 400 times, it wouldn't be 400 times
No.
650 million, it would be a lot less. Okay. Any other?
Yeah, I was only being courteous to Gerald, who's bigger than me.
And because I eat too much.
The thing about these comparisons, so I'm not going to sit here and defend our friends in Spelthorne. I don't agree with that financial strategy. I don't agree with it because, for me, the essence of successful business, and we've got to stop thinking about local government as a business with a social conscience. We've got to. If you really look at local government, it's got product streams, and we all call them services. Like, you have to give it. But we've got product streams. You can look at it that way. And a big company like Mars and many other, Unilever, Procter & Gamble, blah, 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 all have diversified product streams. Spelthorne, bless their cotton socks, have rather focused on a single strategy with one chance of success. And I do think that's dangerous. The Public Works Loan Board, by the way, isn't quite the enemy that people would like to make it out to be, because I'm about to make a major investment in East Hampshire, by the way, a very, very large 8-figure number. And our advisors, who are the best city advisors you can get your hands on, because we're not stupid, by the way, we use the best, have directed me to one major pension fund, who are undercutting the Public Works Loan Board. So it's not necessarily nationalisation if you really hunt around.
Fair enough. What shall I go on to the next?
No, I think that's right. Spelthorne was one of the examples that I saw when I was reading up about this, and it does seem absurdly high gearing. And I don't know who runs Spelthorne Council, and maybe he's the greatest property investor in history. I don't know. I'm sceptical, but maybe. I'm usually sort of against this sort of thing, but should there be caps on sort of gearing ratios for councils and such? I don't know.
So I'll go on to the next question so we can fit them in. So this one comes from Andrew Ashenden. Basically, his question is about the investments in shopping centres recently, which I think a number of councils have done. In fact, I think we've been to Haywards Heath, where I think there's one there. His question is essentially, due to the ever-increasing shop vacancies, he argues that income from these purchases is steadily reducing. Is it easy to predict trouble ahead? And if there is trouble, will anyone be called to account?
I can do it.
Okay, please do.
So we've already picked off the diversification point, which underlies all of these discussions. Frankly, diversification is at the heart of all of this. So nobody, I think, should be putting all their eggs in one basket. We have an element of our portfolio in retail, it's true, but and we also have had our acquisition procedures, which include the best advisors you can buy in the United Kingdom, vetted by one of the leading property managers for one of the biggest pension funds in Britain. And I had it because he's a friend of mine, because I'm still connected with the city quite well. And I've had him in for half a day to go through all of our procedures, and he's signed them all off. So we have a diversified portfolio. He agrees with our balance. What we look at, to some degree, is the sector, yeah. But when you're buying commercial property, you're also looking at location. You know, so if retail dies, can you redeploy that real estate for another purpose? If you can't, we don't buy. So we have that hedged. We're looking at the tenant, the quality of the tenant. Is this a blue chip tenant? So, for example, we have bought Tesco Quidgley, if you're out there. Tesco are probably financially the most successful retailer right now. They've had many, many years of uninterrupted profit growth. I think they're the only major grocery multiple that can claim that. So they're very successful. And what we bought for is income. So we have had one site, let's be honest, let's be absolutely honest, where the tenant went bust. Metro Inns. You probably don't see them anymore. And because it's a brilliant site on a brilliant major road, we've just re-let that to McDonald's. Thanks very much, more rent. So there's more to this than just the sector you're in. You've got to look at the site and the reusability and the quality of the tenant, and then you can get good quality property deals.
I think this sounds great. You've inspired me, I have to say. Since there is something good out there in local government. This is what I think across all these sectors, across all these investments, if you have the skills and the knowledge to go out there and do it, you can do it well. And whether that's public sector, private sector, you could argue there's an element more security in the public sector, in that ultimately government will bail you out if it all goes wrong. But not that I would advocate that. But so there is an opportunity there for local government, whether it's in retail, and there's some really innovative stuff that happens in retail. We've got a local business that drives all of their footfall into their store through social media, and has a massive and growing footfall compared to all the other retail sector in the town that's on its knees because of the innovative way they approach it. And if you find the right property and the right tenant, absolutely, in terms of retail. But I think it's true that for me, councils should be run like businesses, and there are certain products or services that you have to provide, and there are others that with that innovation you can change and grow, but you've got to try and attract the right people. I don't know how many councils around the country are run by former directors of Mars. Probably not our executive mayor. Our executive mayor's work history involves doing Punch and Judy shows at children's parties. That's not even a joke. That's true. So you can see why we might not have the skills and knowledge to do that. But I started at the beginning by saying, I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing, but you've certainly got to invest locally. You've certainly got to have the skills to do it.
So Ben, I think there's part of the reason of not investing locally, and part of that is that you should not be investing driven by emotion. And if you are investing locally, you can be driven because there's pressure from you to do something to save the supermarket, save the House of Fraser or whatever. And if you're going to do this and you're going to do it properly, you need to be driven by the finances and the numbers. And so in some ways it's easier to do it away from home. So I've been approached, both our Debenhams are for sale, and I've said no. Both of them have got long leases and they're asking stupid money, and they're paying stupid rent. So I'm not going to touch it. But some people, when things get tough, might crumble. And in some ways, investing outside of your district gives you a little bit of security from that emotional blackmail that might come down your road.
Let's throw open to the audience. So there was a gentleman over here in the white shirt, and I'll come to the gentleman in the pink shirt, and then we'll go around the room.
Ben got dangerously close just from making the point I was going to make, which I'll try and turn to a question. Just on the final point we had there, I think it's a very sensible point actually. I think there is a conflict if local authorities are investing in their own area. But then I fully take Ben's point, which is that it's all disincentivising the private sector to come and invest. So why don't we just change the law whereby no local authority can invest in their own area? There's no disincentivisation. You have to play in other people's backyard.
be a challenging one. I think you'd find lots of local authorities looking to invest in certain places and not so many looking to buy in some parts of the country, which might distort things slightly. But I do think, as much as there are practices that I don't like, and that kind of investment is one, if we are as a government going to say you need to generate your own income and run a council like a business, it's difficult then for government to say, but you can't do X and you can't do Y. We have to either be kind of free marketeers that want to run local government that way or not. So as much as I moan about Mansfield District Council, I'd actually like them to have more powers to go and do more stuff that they want to do. I'd just like better leadership.
Well, this is the point I was going to make. Let's just address the sort of elephant in the room. Isn't the difference between Mansfield Council and East Hampshire to do with personnel? We need better personnel in local government. If that's to do with paying people more, if it's to do with a greater focus on local government, that we're attracting higher calibre of councillors, of officers in local authorities. That's the striking difference to me, sat here listening to tales of two different local authorities. I appreciate that question, but I thought it was worth stating.
So can I disagree?
We can find that. Yeah.
Can I disagree?
Only if you don't talk about your own council.
So I was going to give you an example. So we run the port in Portsmouth, and we run it as a successful business. And there was another business next door to us, which had been bought by a hedge fund with a whole range of different things, and they made a complete mess of it because they weren't used to being a shipping company. And so the day before it was going to go bust, we bought it to extend the port, so he gave us more wharf space so we could grow the business. Now, that also saved 200 jobs, which was important, but that's a business that we will gradually grow, but nobody else wanted it. And we now do very, very strange things. Do you eat bananas?
I do, yes.
65% of all bananas eaten in England are imported by a company owned by my council.
I'm going to stop eating bananas.
But we would say no. Yes.
I think we're going to have to let Ben go because he's going back.
This is really weird.
Thank you
I
very
actually
much.
knew that banana fact.
Right.
But opportunities to support the government are few and far between these days, so I'm really going to take one. Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome the gentleman. See you, Ben. Nice to talk to you. Take care. I think there was a point you made at the end there. This question that's on the table, I think begs one of the most important questions facing local government, which isn't on the table. Calibre. You see, it's calibre. And I think this is a huge issue because with calibre, I believe you can do these things. Yes, it is true that not all councils are run by an ex-director of marketing, but buried in the population are people with my background who would be interested in doing it. So we need to find a way of getting people with the right skills into local government. We also, what we've done in HDC, by East Hampshire District Council, by the way, is we've changed our recruitment strategy. So we actually try not to recruit, I'm sorry to say, from the public sector. We actually recruit from the private sector. And it's the begged question is this calibre point. If the motion was, how do we get better calibre into the public sector, I'd be wrestling more with my answers than I am tonight, because I think that's still open as a really big issue.
Sorry, Alex, you just wanted to... Not on the hiring point, I agree with it. It's just the sort of whole upside downside risk profile is just is completely asymmetric. And if you had a system whereby councils could, for instance, issue their own debt, and actually if it all went to the wall, then they would pay some kind of price rather than what would happen in reality was that they'd be bailed out by central government. Then I think that this kind of this way to run a council would be a lot less controversial. But you've just got a problem whereby Spelthorne may go the proverbial may hit the fan there. What's going to be what is the consequence of that to the people who made the decisions? Almost nothing. I mean, the government may insist that the chief executive has to stand down as a condition of bailout money, but I mean that's it's not here nor there really, is it?
Just following the banks.
Okay, so the gentleman in the picture, you've been waiting very patiently.
I've also gone on to make this an essay. I disagree with the point on the investing locally. I mean, the MTR in Hong Kong and Singapore and Taiwan have shown that local public sector bodies can do fantastic things when they invest locally and then benefit from the uplift that their investment gets. So just a quick point. couple of other very quick ones too. Is there something about accounting here? Like they're investing outside the area because they can just count it as income, whereas doing up a park or something, you can't count it as income even though it actually makes the area really good. So there might be some issue about accounting in terms of investment. But the main one I really was interested in is, the public sector bodies aren't private sector organisations, and the purpose that they're there for is actually not the same. And so we can't just put it down as profit, loss, all this sort of thing, while they do need income to do it. And I do wonder whether there's some things around the Town and Country Planning Act, I think it is, where local authorities used to be able to acquire land without a hope van attached and then do interesting stuff with it. And I'd be interested to know if that was anything to do with port or anything like that. But nowadays they're forced to pay full whack, which, going back to the points made by the panel, that Cllr isn't likely to time things right or choose the right sites or get the cycle of retail and online businesses right. They like to lose a lot of money, but if they were able to keep the benefit that they've got from signing the paper that gave planning permission in the first place, wouldn't that enable a lot of these risks to be mitigated a lot?
I think some of the facts you've testified, I'm not aware that they are there, those limitations, for example, or those Town and Country Planning Acts, I'm not sure that they exist. What I do think is important to agree on is that the purpose of a public sector body is, guess what, it's in the title, is to produce a public service, all right? That's what it is there for. So nobody in my council, not me, would ever question the fundamental rationale for a public sector organisation. We are here to provide a public service. What we need, or what we're trying to secure, is the freedom to choose how to do this, how to do it. Because if we go, for example, for every Spelthorne, I'm sorry, there's a Northamptonshire. There's a council which is doing it the old way and gone bust. Spectacularly bust. So you can't say, nobody can say there is a way of doing this. I'm not saying that. I think actually, as in the world of commerce, there are different solutions for different problems. In commerce, nobody would question that, broadly speaking, British industry has got quite good skills. Of course, there are some gaps. Nobody would argue with that either. But, Britain's still one of the, I think, 8th biggest economy in the world. So must be doing something quite good. And I think we've got to set about getting local government up to that standard. Public service ethos, but with a commercial financial driver behind it. Otherwise, at the end of it, the sums ain't going to add up.
I mean, the problem with that is that we're not just talking about recruitment for a business, we're talking about politics. If you look at some of the sort of leaked budget proposals from Momentum in Brighton, it's not going to matter. I mean, they want to build a railway, across the seafront. It's never going to make its money. The problem in this is politics more than, if it was sort of like a more sort of Hong Kong style where it was just like a management company appointed, then I'd agree with it. But we're not just talking about finance and things like running a business. It's the politics that makes this a lot more controversial. I mean, I'm guessing that your party's in a pretty solid position where you are. Let's just say hypothetically that the opposition got in. Do you think that they do things up to
in my council,
standard?
I can tell you that because Vernon's got a really good story. In my council, we did have an opposition, and then we didn't. We went to 44-0, and the reason we went to 44-0 is because all the Liberal Democrats joined the Conservative Party because they thought we were doing such a cracking job. It's true. One of them was the PPC for East Hampshire, and he's one of my group now. So actually, success succeeds. Do you know that?
And we had the opposite. So in Portsmouth, which shouldn't be a Lib Dem place at all, our council is 17 Conservatives, 17 Lib Dems, 5 Labour and 3 Independents. The Independents are 2 ex-Labour, 1 ex-Tory, but in our group we've had I think 4 Tories join us and 3 Labour join us, and so it goes around. And I think the issue about politics is really important. If you can encourage good people in, so the guy we've got as a cabinet member for economic development is 24. He started his company when he was 16. He's our only Vietnamese ethnic councillor. But we pay him 18 grand a year, and so he has to run his own company as well. and the rewards of being in local government as an elected person are not huge. If you're a council officer, it's a different kettle of onions. Can I just go back to your point about planning? The thing that would really make a huge difference for us would be having the powers to compulsorily purchase vacant buildings that have been abandoned. So I've got a huge office block on our seafront, which has been empty at least for 16 years, and they pay no rates because they did a deal with the government to pay no rates. So everybody else who's got an empty building has to, and we have got probably a really good deal, a back-to-back deal. So if we could buy it, CPO it, we'd immediately send it over to the private sector to redevelop. But we can't because CPO powers don't exist, and I'm told it'll take us 2-3 years to be able to do it. And leaving abandoned private land available for development like that is a blight on towns and cities across the country. And I have no idea why government allow it to happen and turn their back on all the money that they should be getting.
So is it only central government that can do cost purchase?
No, we can, but it's a hugely difficult thing to do. And it'll cost us an awful lot of money to be able to do it. A simpler system where we can say, that's been vacant for 16 years, this is what you're going to get, we'll have an agreed lands tribunal price, you're not going to be ripped off, but we will not trust you with that piece of property anymore because you just left it there, abandoned for 16 years, to blight an entire area. It can't be right, the system we have now.
Right, I'm keen to take some more questions. I'm going to go to the gentleman from bright blue, then to Ian, then to Charles, then to that gentleman over there, if we can all remember that. So.
Mine is a genuine question. I have no opinion on what's that's from my mouth, but to follow the logic of some of the things presented, if we were to treat local authorities like businesses more, and maybe could we follow an academy style situation where you could become a bigger business, you could go into other areas? I mean, what are the pros, what are the costs? And in fact, it leads on to the last point, these are not businesses. What does it look like if this kind of situation doesn't work? And obviously, a pretty important proviso, this is not to dismiss the importance of local ties, which I'm sure we'll all talk about, but what is the logic of that? What does it look like, and why, why not, or why should we?
Well, surprising it may sound, I'm a great believer in completely shaking up the way that you get hold of councillors, and I'm a great believer in that. And we, my former chief exec, who's now chief exec of Southampton City Council, by the way, your arch friends.
Yeah, we work very closely with them.
She took to the Local Government Association our last but one councillor recruitment programme. So the council recruited councillors. Now, this is traditionally not possible. Political parties recruit councillors. This is absolutely where the problem starts, in my opinion. First of all, I don't wish or require or need, as a Conservative, to have Conservative Party members in my council. Practically nothing I've done has got anything to do with the Conservative ethos, other than maybe keep tax low and allow people to spend more. You could have, but these are business decisions. So when I was at Mars, I wasn't making Conservative Party decisions. I was making business decisions. So I don't feel that need. And I think what we did was we recruited councillors. It was called #ChangeYourWorld. And we said, if you're going to be a councillor and change the world, come join the East Hampshire District Council. Big old workshopy thing around the district. And okay, the party agents and so on were in the room with their table and stuff. And then you would come along to be a councillor, hear how great it is and what we do, and then nip off to your independent store, your Labour store. I think we should do it that way round, rather than feel that the parties have to populate local councils with political activists, regardless of ability. And I can think of a few who are not.
No.
The LGA runs a programme called Be a Councillor, so it's a cross-party thing to go out and recruit people, because I think all of us would agree, across parties, if you can drive up the gene pool, that's brilliant. And I will ask almost anybody that I meet who I think is any good in Portsmouth if they want to stand for the council, and then only afterwards ask them which party they'd want to stand for.
Ian.
Right, I came this evening a bit like Alex. Opinions both ways. There's three things I've heard tonight that have made me think more that I'd like comments on. One, I think everyone has agreed that if you're making big investments it is very silly to put all your eggs in one basket, and some councils seem to be doing that. I don't want to take away councils' freedom to do things, but at the same time, does there need to be some sort of control on it? 2, when councils make investments, they are open to public and political criticism. Some people complain every time they've made an investment which they think may not be ethical or for political reasons, and that might not necessarily be a good business thing. And 3rd and finally, there is one crucial difference in, if I go along to an investment advisor and make an investment and we get it horribly wrong, I suffer.
Yes.
But it's my money. And I can't blame anyone else. But if councils do it with large amounts, they are doing it with large amounts of other people's money. And I think there is a very subtle and important difference there. Once again, I don't want to take their freedom away, but it can't be a total free for all. That's I'd welcome comments on this.
I think on the money, this is a tricky one because notwithstanding quality issues and calibre issues among staff and councillors, which I've accepted, the system has to allow the public to trust the councils with money. Because forget property, just a minute, just forget equities, forget anything like that. There's still a net service expenditure in my council of around 40 million, in Gerald's of 100
overall 520.
520. So we are still managing 9-figure sums, councils, counties 10-figure sums of money. So if one starts with the premise that they can't do it, we've really got ourselves in
We're a bit stuck.
quite a tangle. I think we have to believe they can. I think training and calibre can be improved. But you know, the thing that I think the biggest thing I did with staff at the council was talk about risk. And you touched on that a bit. And they said, "Oh, Ferris, this is such a risky thing you're doing, you see." And so I said, "Well, where's our money right now?" "Oh, it's in the banks."
Icelandic lands.
It's in the banks. You can't do better than that. It's in the bank, you see. So then I said, so just remind me what the rate of interest is. 0.5. Okay, and what's the CPI at the moment? 2.1. So this risk-free strategy is guaranteeing the taxpayers they will lose money every single year without exception. Thank you for that. Rob.
One thing that occurs to me then, I could have said just now, is that for years, councils have always invested their reserves to make interest. I think it was never it only ever became controversial after the debacle of the Icelandic lands.
And we got all that money back.
Yes.
It took time, but we got it all back.
Yes.
So so we're having big debate in our council about whether we invest in this energy company. So it's a real division. So my Conservative and Labour councillors are really keen, and I'm really not. And one of the things that really worries me is looking at the contract to say that we would need to lend this company £9.5 million of taxpayers' money. And I worry about that. And looking at all the other ones that have gone under in the last year, 8 of them have gone bust. And the response from my Conservative and Labour colleagues is to say, but that's a problem with liquidity. You could just lend this company more. Now, I think that's not the right way of doing things, but they might have a point. But I just think the level of risk is really, really high when you say you're going to go into a business, you're going to support them with a bottomless pit of money, which is why we decided we're not doing it, and why they're so cross with me. It's about the level of risk you're prepared to take financially. But there is a way in which we get to it. It may not happen in East Hampshire, but there are judgments. So if we screw up, we lose our seats at election time. We're out of jobs.
And also, I know a reasonable amount about this sector, and I agree with you. I think it's a horrible idea to go into energy. And it also comes back to something that you said earlier about the sort of the dilemma that they're going to face at some point when they decide, are we going to put the prices up to well, you know, they're also politicians who are going to be
Yeah.
sort of deciding on this stuff. If it's an election cycle, are they going to make the correct commercial decision or not?
And we have elections
Probably
every
not.
year.
Well, there you go. So I think that's probably the most clear-cut example. You can certainly make arguments in favour or against certain properties. I think that's 100% no. I don't think there's an argument. I don't think there's a decent argument in favour of energy companies personally.
Aren't you missing the point of the question here? Because the question here is who carries the care if it all goes tits up?
Exactly.
We do. I lose my seat. I lose my job.
The question is all the taxpayer.
You should pay back the money, you made the investment. Why should
Yes,
you
should
pay it back?
But then I don't get to keep the profit either.
On that, to take the question absolutely, I think your questioning perhaps wasn't quite a direct answer. To take it absolutely
My
literally.
question was the direct question, it wasn't an answer.
So to take the question absolutely literally, which I think is perhaps what you're asking for, and to give a very, very literal answer, all local government funding is 100% backed by the Treasury.
Yeah.
So the literal answer to the literal question, what happens if we screw the whole thing up and it all
Yep.
goes down the drain, is Her Majesty's Treasury pays it all.
Well, that's rubbish.
And that's
We are the
you-
taxpayers, we have to pay that money in the
Yeah,
first
no,
place.
and it's exactly the
But
same
that's where it comes from.
with the
If you ask
Ministry
the question, it comes
Ministry
from-
Paid twice over.
Ministry of Defence procurement. If something goes
They do.
twice over
Yeah,
budget,
yeah.
the minister doesn't pay.
Treasury
We
pays.
do.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah,
They
everybody
make the
does.
decisions, it goes tits up and we pay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But
So
if
wouldn't it be a good idea to have less tax therefore?
Well,
Then you wouldn't be paying for it.
all
Councillor
tax
Manager's
comes
on
from
this
us.
as well.
Charles, and I'm going to go to that gentleman over there.
Is it not the case that this council socialism is essentially socialism? Because the council is putting things in production.
Well, no.
If or constructionism is Glasgow, if that was rolled out across the country, that would lead to a lot of crowding out of private firms running things. And as you have all conceded, the political process, I'm currently standing for town council, have gone through that process, just selects the wrong people and people that aren't competent. You, sir, clearly are competent, a very competent individual, but most people aren't.
First time that's been said.
Most people in local government aren't. I mean, we have a county councillor who says she only got involved in it because she'd be lonely otherwise. The political process just isn't going to allow for decent enough individuals to maximise the profits of firms, which must occur in a growing economy, because is it not the case that if the councils did this on a mass scale, they would just crowd out private investment and you would get a lower rate of return and less profit, because these individuals would inevitably be less competent because the weeding out process is so much worse within the public sector?
I'd love to give you two thoughts on that cracking question, and in fact, really, to do that question justice needs a lot more time. But first of all, I'm proud to say, as a Conservative, that I count Hilary Benn as one of my friends. Now, he's a kind of a centrist left-wing politician, so you might expect that. And he came down to Whitehead and Borden, wanted to show him around, just before he challenged Corbyn. In fact, he withdrew his challenge in the end against Corbyn. And I was explaining all this to him as we were going around the town. And he said, well, Ferris, he says, it's fine, it's the distribution policy you've got. He said, what you're doing is you're avoiding taxing people who can't afford it, and you're supplementing that by discretionary fees and charges to those who can. So he saw it as a redistributive policy, which is not so far off what you just said. And actually, you could see it in that. Well, I personally don't, but I understand the point. I think the other one, which I'm going to give you a bit of a soft answer to, I know it because I haven't had time to think of a better one, is I think that when I was in industry and after Mars, I ran quite a lot of decent-sized, medium-sized companies. Never be afraid of competition. Competition always brings a good answer. Sometimes you don't know which way it's going to go. So crowding out, I think, would lead to this seismic readjustment of the local government scene that we need. I think the trouble is we haven't had the seismic eruption, the volcanic explosion that we need to really change the world here. The NHS needs a volcanic explosion. We have to find another way of providing healthcare free at the point of use. Because the current system, I'm not sure when my children are my age, if there will be a National Health Service in this country. I worry about that because it's the wrong model. So, soft answer, I know, but I would say that maybe I'm a chucker stones into the pond person. I like them. See where the ripple goes and then react. And I think maybe that's where I'm sort of headed, close as I can to your question.
And can I disagree with your question? Because I actually think the premise is wrong. On the whole, I think quite a lot of people in local government do a good job. And one of the tests of that is why the private sector hasn't come and bid for it. Nobody in the private sector wants to run children's social services. Nobody wants to run adult social services. There's no competition, there's no private companies out there demanding to come and run it, and hasn't been forever. And because what the councils have done is really tough stuff with very limited amounts of money, and on the whole providing pretty good services by people who work pretty well, pretty good hours, and work really hard. So I think the idea that somehow everybody involved in local government is not skilled, is not doing a good job, is wrong, and we need to confront that, because on the whole most people do a pretty good job.
I'm a chartered accountant, and I was 6 years on the Kensington and Chelsea Council, and I ran my own business in construction for over 40 years. And there are 2 points that I will make. One is a point of principle, and that is, if you screwed up when you're at Mars on bringing in your ice cream, what would have happened? There may have been a blip in Mars's profit. It may have been a total disaster for them, in which case the shareholders would have said, you're out. But the trouble is that when you move into the public sector and you screw up, we all have to pay.
Yeah.
Not the shareholders of Mars, we all have to pay. And that's the point of principle. And the second point is the point of practicality. The idea, and it's grown in recent times, is that property is a one-way street always upwards. It's for the birds. I went through the disasters in the 70s of in property. And all you have to do is to look at companies like Hammerson, who caught a huge cut on retail parks, on land securities, and they've had massive devaluations. And Tesco, look at Tesco a few years ago, some of the price kind of halved because they had huge accounting problems there. So the idea that these are all great companies, and you can compete with them, is just for the birds. And the practicality, this is my last point, is this. I'm in Buckinghamshire, and my Bucks County Council has got over a billion turnover. Now the deputy leader, who's a lovely man, was the former Conservative Party constituency agent for Cheshire and Hampshire. The idea that he has the slightest knowledge of how businesses operate is for the birds. And the trouble is, sorry, I know.
Yes, I'm glad you didn't point out.
You will make
pointing at you, okay.
You will make a success of what you're doing. It's quite clear that you've got the energy, you've got the knowledge, and all the rest of it. But I'm afraid you're a 1 in 100, and most of the councillors that I meet and whatever, I wouldn't give them tuppence for their views. It's sad. But true.
But in which case, that's a huge indictment for all of us involved in politics. Absolute indictment that we select rubbish people.
Some of these Westminster politicians too, they're pretty hopeless as well.
So absolutely. So I used to work locking people up, and I ended up locking teenagers up. It's a hugely disturbed adolescents. And then I went to work in Parliament, and it was remarkably similar. But I think there is an absolute necessity for all of us in politics, whichever party we're in, about going out and finding those good people who will actually do this stuff for us. Local council is incredibly important. My mum was a councillor, my granddad was a councillor. We all kind of, and my sister's just got elected as a councillor. So it's kind of in the family blood. But for most people, it's terrifying. The thought that you can get a good kicking in the paper every day in Portsmouth because you're a councillor, and as you do, and actually we pay really rubbish salaries. I asked somebody to be cabinet member for children, to be legally responsible for 430 kids in care, and we pay him 18 grand a year. Who in business would do that? Mm-hmm. It's absolutely mad. And until we get serious about getting good people and treating them properly, then you will only get those people who might go, rather like the House of Lords, to have care in the community.
But how much does your chief executive get?
140,000.
Well, the other ones should get paid more. No doubt.
Yeah, but when the Daily Mail starts running a campaign to say, pay your councillors better, I will eat my hat.
It's a cheaper scenario, isn't
Surely
it?
the problem is that really good people are very difficult to find.
Yes.
And on the whole, the wrong people get selected.
Yes.
I think the one that everyone can look at is the health service. Look what they would do, the government. They say, now, what would that person be paid who's got that number of people working for them in the industry? And of course, it's not the same at all. And you get this situation where people at the head of very important industries are the wrong people,
Yes.
and it's very difficult to attract the right ones. I've got a long-term investment involved. I used to be given a Mars bar if I got home quickly, and a Milky Way if I didn't.
Right, Sue.
Right, because we're running out of time. So can I take 3 questions at once? There was a lady over there who has a question. So we're going to take yours, and then we'll take 2 more. And then I'm sorry, as always, it's too many questions. There's not enough time.
I'm actually cabinet member for planning and economy at Rushmore Borough Council, and that's a tiny borough using Regenco.
You're a customer.
Yes,
Welcome.
Indeed we are. It just consists of the 2 towns of Farnborough and Aldershot. We have major regeneration plans for both of our towns, plus we are currently paying 30% of our services through our investment income. So by any standards, we're doing pretty well.
Yeah.
We brought this about by the sort of seismic change you were talking about. New CEO, complete reorganisation, new senior management team, and in fact we staged a coup and took over the council from our own leadership. So absolutely seismic.
Brilliant.
Where it all falls down is scrutiny. And it comes back to what can we do in order to get the expertise into the scrutiny panels that is lacking in the elected members. I mean, surely we need to bring in that expertise for the scrutiny role.
Okay, 2 more. Yeah, we'll take 2 more, then we'll do it all at once. 2 more questions. This gentleman here.
So, one word that I haven't heard mentioned tonight is corruption. And I spent several years living in the Middle East where I've seen their economies completely corrupted by sovereign wealth entities, by government-related entities that have a lot of money to throw around. Surely there's a concern. Your councillors are local in their community, they're dealing with local business people, they make the rules, they enforce the rules, particularly with respect to property. You know, how on earth do you manage corruption and conflicts of interest? And that can only, I'm not saying it's bad, but I'm saying it can only get worse the more money that the councils have to invest locally. And this is why, for example, the Norwegians, when they set up their sovereign wealth fund, the first thing they did was say that sovereign wealth fund cannot invest in Norway because they knew that it would distort and potentially distort corrupt the economy.
And the gentleman at the back there in the blue.
Yeah, I'm a councillor in rural Somerset up until May I am. And our council have embarked on a similar thing, actually from Hedge End, so I know both of you are very well, Royal Navy Reservists, I don't come to Portsmouth. So I agree with all the things you've done, brilliant, but both your areas are very affluent. Portsmouth's got massive, those areas you were talking about are major development areas. I mean, they are prime areas. So that's good investment in my opinion. I think it's good because there's always something back again. But it's not always the case. When you've got a rural district council who borrows a lot of money, it is a problem. We've gone through the due process, we've had it all assessed by whoever it is and got to assess it. But I don't think there's any comeback for the public. They're not seeing their council tax, they're still having full whack council tax increases. I see Portsmouth almost has done the same last year, maybe the lowest overall, but have done the same. So no one's getting any money back for it. I don't think council taxpayers care if it's properly managed that these properties are being purchased. But if they're not getting, they're not seeing it. They're seeing more telephone numbers of these grand apartments. And I think it's about time there should be some sort of tariff, government tariff put on to profits or so-called profits in order to really make councils think. Not two excellent councils you've got here, but I mean make them really think about what income they're getting, because they're not passing it on to anybody apart from keeping it within officer groups, council allowances and that sort of thing. And I think that's what's wrong with it, and that's why I didn't vote for it in the end. I just couldn't. I agree with the principle, but not the way it's been dealt with. And the charging, for example, I'll just very quick make a point. You know, if you use public works loan for commercial entity, broadly speaking, you've got to charge commercial rates at it. You've got to pay the commercial rates back to whoever you've got to pay it back to. So what councils do is they back charge administrative fees. So it mitigates it. So they're still getting cheap loans over 30, 40, 50, up to 80 years with the Public Works Loan Board, which business can never get, ever get. And I think that's wholly wrong.
Okay. So, panelists,
Can I just say,
go on then, go on.
with a 30% real terms reduction in 20 years, we have given every household in East Hampshire £80 every single year. That's the give back.
Okay. Right, so we had three questions. We had a lady over there about scrutiny, gentleman here about corruption, citing the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, and then the fact that you said that the council tax is still increasing. So you have 8 minutes between the three of you to tackle those three subjects.
Oliver's probably got the least say. A lot of comments have been made about quality of elected officials, and I do think that one of the problems is that there are simply too many of them.
Yes,
how many councillors are there? Like how many thousands? 8,000. Like there aren't that many. Just aren't that many good people. Let alone people who do local government. Part of the reason for this is we have two-tier authorities, and I personally would prefer them to all be unitaries. Get rid of layers of management, you get rid of a load of councillors, but one of the reasons why that won't happen is because political parties will lose a large number of foot soldiers to go out and deliver leaflets and stuff like that. So it just comes back to the age-old sort of conflict of what's a good commercial decision versus what's a good political decision. And one sort of other idea which I was thinking about is if there's a I think you can do this now since 2013. If an NHS hospital trust is failing, it can be taken over by a better NHS hospital trust. Now, should there be a situation whereby, let's say that, I don't know, trying not to get myself in trouble here, but let's say Southampton Council's failing, but Portsmouth Council is doing well. Should there be some kind of way in which they could take this over, and how do you reconcile that with democratic accountability and local rivalries, should we say? But is there some sort of scope for something like that?
I think in terms of calibre, you see, we've moved off. By and large, is commercial property investment a good thing? Isn't that interesting, you see? Because in a balanced portfolio, obviously it is. I mean, we've all got property investment. All of us, I'm sure, sitting in this room. And we've chosen, actually, if you look at our investment portfolios, so most of us, we're shockingly skewed because of our domestic residents.
Yes.
We are shocking, we are appalling investors. And we, as a council, are much better than I am as a person. Much better. We've got a far more balanced portfolio. So first of all, the answer to property is balance, but it's not the answer to management. The answer to management is calibre. So the real question is, how do we get calibre in? Yes. Now, on a small scale, I know it's East Hampshire, I know it's nothing, nobody cares about us, 2/3 of us are Southampton National Park anyway, so what have we got to say? Do you know what? We're doing it. I can't do any more than do it. I can't be bigger. I can't be Southampton or Portsmouth or Mansfield or Manchester. I can't be. But if somebody is doing it, somebody is looking at that person doing it. And that's beginning to happen. So our colleagues in Rushmore are using our services. Actually, we were saying just now, I spend a lot of my time talking with people in other councils, showing them how this can be done. And as the critical mass grows, then so will the skill base, and so will the quality, and eventually we'll get there. Because if we carry on, honestly, I'm really sorry, Alex, but those same old failed strategies, let's have a unitary. Well, what is a unitary other than centralisation? What have we just discovered in Britain about the European Union? Centralisation doesn't work. So some people want us to centralise local government. Actually, do you know what that's called? That's called national government. Thank you, Westminster. You're not doing very well. I'd rather have 8,000 local councillors than 600 in Westminster. Thanks very much for that.
So quickly running through the questions. Scrutiny, I think it's a good point. If I'm honest, I don't think scrutiny really works very well. So I think we're in Portsmouth and I'm looking to move back to committee systems so that we have cross-party committees, because I want to grow the talent across parties. In all the parties, we need to grow the next generation to understand what's going on so that we've got the next cabinet member for this and that. And so I think it'll cost us no more, but it'll mean that scrutiny happens by the people also making the decisions. So that's where I think we should go. Unitaries, I think, are absolutely the right thing to do, I'm sorry to say. In Portsmouth, nobody would ever think of going back to having the county council and the city council, because it was about buck passing. Now everything is my fault. No, and I can't escape that, and that's extremely good that everybody knows that it's the Portsmouth Council and that's it. Because we can't hide behind each other. Oh, it's the county. Oh, it's the district. Oh, one people collect the rubbish, but another council gets rid of it. It's completely mad. Although I know Eric always used to say that if he ever mentioned the word local government reorganisation, people were to take out the pearl-handled revolver and shoot him, because it would mean considerable reduction in the number of Conservative deliverers available who are the district councillors. Yeah. So in terms of corruption, it is clearly a problem. I don't think it's as big a problem here as in many places. I've been a councillor for 28 years, and I think I'd been offered a bribe once and I didn't realise it at the time. It was somebody, a farmer, offering me half a pig. I think we're just back in. You might well, you probably. We've had one councillor in Portsmouth sent to jail for corruption. He was an idiot. His mum still says he's innocent. But it was a property developer who thought there were people who had it in for him politically, and so set up a camera to watch an interview with a councillor, and he offered him 500 quid in cash to do a planning application. He said yes and took the money. And rightfully, he was sent to jail, a cheapskate at 500 quid. But he was not one of the best councillors we've ever had.
He's not paid enough.
Absolutely. Finally, I did two things. I've never answered gentlemen over here. When my fund manager loses money on my pension, he doesn't get fired. When people at RBS blew billions, most of them kept their jobs. In the private sector, we don't sack everybody who screws up. And we need to have some level on it. And finally, on council, I think you're right. I've been in opposition for 4 years, I'm now back. But in the previous 4 years, we held the council tax and froze it for 3 out of the 4 years and did 1% the other year. But one of the things that I always get attacked for is that several years ago, we ended up with a significant surplus at the end of the year. And so I decided we would send all pensioners a cheque for 50 quid. Because pensioners tend to be the people who are poorest. And so we sent every pensioner in the city a cheque for 50 quid as a repayment from their council tax, because we'd managed the budget properly and he'd come in significantly under budget. And I get absolutely a good kicking for that.
Just before the election.
We have elections every year. Every May we have an election with one year out of 4. But we on an annual cycle it always happens. But it seemed to be the right thing to do. If the count, probably now with the cuts in government funding, it was a stupid thing to do because I should have kept that money in the bank. But in those days we thought finances were better. But it was the right thing to do.
Just before I turn to summing up, and while I still have your attention before we all go off and get drinks, I'd just like to point out this booklet that's been on your seats here. This is a book we put together a little while ago now about the Grassroots campaign at the TPA. And you'll notice in here there are a number of campaigns. I think we've got some beer duty in there. There's a local campaign up in Smethwick to do with the Midland Metropolitan Hospital. Please do take this with you and share with your friends and family. If you know of any campaign in your area that we should be looking into, then please do let us know. My contact details I think are in here, or on the very least on the back, or if you'd like my card, come and see me afterwards. But I just want to get that in before we go. Right, turning attention to what we've been discussing today, I think a fascinating discussion. I knew it would be. We had a stellar panel, and I thank them very much indeed. So I think let's thank them in the usual way by giving them a round of applause.